Hey guys, this is going to be the last video of the year. Um, I'm just going to review the chapters that we've gone over. Um, and if you haven't done so already, just kind of finish up that essay and turn that in. So for sixth grade next year, we're going to be doing a lot more of that, working on developing and writing essays. But so I'm just going to go through the chapters, just kind of refresh your minds on some of the things that we've learned and but I just want to thank you for a good year, and I hope that you've been able to learn a lot, not just from this class, but from all your other classes as well. So thank you again, and I hope to see you next year, and I'm just going to go over some of these things. All right, so remember the very first beginning of the year, we talked about America's first people, the Native Americans, and those different tribes and where they lived. Like, for example, the Iroquois, how they lived in the northeastern part of the United States, I believe, the Chumash, the Inuit, uh, the Pueblo, the Navajo, a lot of those other tribes. Second chapter was about the European exploration and settlement. Countries like Spain, Italy, England, they all sent settlers over, like Christopher Columbus. Also, people like pilgrims and separatists who decided to want to leave the Church of England or the Catholic Church, come to places and start their own colonies like Massachusetts and Connecticut and some other colonies like that. For a lot of it for religious, a lot of it for religious freedom, and of course other things, but chapter 3 was also about the 13 colonies, the original 13 colonies, and their locations. Remember, I had you guys do the map, and I quizzed you on where all those were, like Connecticut, New York, Pennsylvania, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and the rest of them. But chapter 4 was on the American independence, and that chapter was from 1750 to 1790. Talked about things like the Townshend Acts, the Tea Acts, talked about things like the Boston Tea Party. We looked at those different paintings of the Boston Massacre and the different points of view that people had. Talked about battles of the Revolutionary War, the Declaration of Independence, which was signed in 1776, which was just a list of grievances against King George III and saying that America was being separated from England and America was its own nation. Next chapter was on the early national period from 1780 to 1820. So we talked about things like the Articles of Confederation, the New Jersey Plan, the Virginia Plan, how best to set up America's government. Talked about Lewis and Clark and their expansion westward. And we bought, or Thomas Jefferson purchased a lot of that land that doubled the size of the United States. Bought it for 15 million or something like that dollars from the French, and expanded the amount of land that was considered the American nation. Next chapter was The Young Nation Grows, which was from 1830 to 1850. Talked about people like Andrew Jackson and how he removed the Indians or the Native Americans off of their land. Next chapter, of course, was on the Civil War and the big issues of slavery, the Confederacy, which were the states that rebelled against the United States, the Union. Lincoln was president during the Civil War and was assassinated. But before that, Lincoln passed the 13th Amendment, which granted slaves their freedom. And then chapter 8 was Reconstruction in the West, and the Reconstruction was about rebuilding the Union, allowing those southern states to come back in to the Union. You had things like black codes. Well, at this point, you could say that they are African Americans, and not slaves or just black people, but since they were free. But they had these things like black codes where they were kind of restricted from owning their own land or from voting, and also these things called the Indian Wars. Next chapter was on the Gilded Age, which was from 1870 to 1890. And the word gilded means like, just kind of means like to be made with gold. And so during this time, you had the growth of industry and like factories and warehouses, and you had these famous men like Carnegie and Rockefeller, J.P. Morgan, and how they went from rags to riches, started out poor, but then ended up making their millions and billions. Also, this was the rise of leisure time. People didn't have to work as much; they had more free time. So this is when you start seeing things like theaters. Professional sports teams becomes a thing. Baseball was invented just after the Civil War. Cincinnati Reds were the very first baseball team. Also, you had this thing called urbanization problems. You had things like where warehouses and cities were very, very dirty. You had people who would photograph child labor and how dangerous it was. People were living very, very close to each other in these cities. They lived in these tenements or these apartment buildings that weren't kept up very well. Next chapter was America's influence spreads from 1898 to 1914. You had famous people like Teddy Roosevelt and this thing called progressive. Progressive just means to create change or to make things better in the United States. And the next chapter, of course, was World War I from 1914 to 1918. So you had terms like the Triple Entente, which was Britain, France, and Russia, I believe. Triple Alliance, which was Germany, Italy, and Austria-Hungary, I believe. And you had the rise of new weapons like machine guns, submarines, gas warfare, tanks, and how that changed warfare altogether. And World War I was the most destructive war. It killed millions and millions of men. And then this next chapter was on the Roaring 20s and depressing 30s. You had things like the stock market crash. People lost a lot of money. And then President FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, did his New Deal, where he created all these programs to get people back to work and to stabilize the economy. And you had people like Andrew Mellon, who believed in tax cuts for regular people and to cut government spending. And then our last chapter, which was Rulers with Iron Fists, and we just talked about Stalin, Hitler, Mussolini, and Hirohito. All right, so we learned a lot. We kind of got started right into World War II with this last chapter, but unfortunately we just couldn't. I think I might have gone a little slower than I probably should have, but that's kind of what we all covered, and I wish we could have gone at least finished up World War II, but unfortunately because of things like the coronavirus, we were kind of slowed down a little bit. But again, I just want to thank you for a good year. Next year will be on ancient history. But again, I just want to thank you for a good year, and I hope you have a good summer, and I will see you next year.